Hello, everyone. Hola a todos. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. Can you all hear me? Great.
Sí,
Thank you for
yes.
joining us for the second panel. My name is María Cecilia. I am a first year PhD student in the Harriet Tubman. I hear echo, so I am very sorry. I'm going to turn my audio down a bit. Let me know via chat if you can't hear me. Yes, first year PhD student in the Harriet Tubman Women, Gender and Sexuality Studies Department. And along with my colleague Jonathan today, we have the pleasure of introducing the panelists. Jonathan is a PhD candidate in the history department, also at UMD. And before I pass it to Jonathan, I just wanted to mention that I am joining in today from Riverdale Park in Maryland, which is located on land of the Piscataway and Anacostan tribes. And I will go ahead and pass it to Jonathan so that he can go ahead and kickstart some of the bios.
Hello, everybody. Likewise, I am tuning in from College Park on Piscataway, Kanoe land. Just wanted to acknowledge the Indigenous legacy of this area. And I, with great pleasure, want to introduce you to our first panelist, Wanda Hernandez. She's a doctoral student in the Department of American Studies at the University of Maryland. Her research interests revolve around the formation of race and ethnic identity among U.S. Central Americans as read through material and visual culture, space and place, and performances of everyday life. Her presentation for today is entitled Archiving Undocumented Central Americans. And I'm going to pass the mic back to Maria. You're muted.
Sorry. Okay. There we go. Okay. So I will go ahead and I'm sorry. I wasn't paying attention because of the technology. Did you introduce the first speaker, Jonathan? Okay. Thank you very much. And then Wanda, Julia Perez, who will be presenting today, Fight Back, an oral history analysis of resistance and gender violence victimization, is a recent graduate student of human rights and politics at the London School of Economics and Political Science. In her spare time, she enjoys taking instant photographs, composing, and indoor gardening. She was born in Georgetown, Guyana, and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and considers both her home. Diego Hurtado Torres will be presenting in Spanish today, and we will have a translator. So as a South American compatriot, I'm going to read his bio in Spanish and probably say some of this in Spanish, and I will try to also translate the bio afterwards. La presentación de Diego para hacer historia en tiempos neoliberales, la conversación como experiencia de aprendizaje. Diego Hurtado Torres, nacido en Chile, Santiago, en Chile, en 1986, obtuvo su licenciatura y magíster en Historia por la Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile entre los años 2005 y 2015. En el spring del 2017 se incorporó al programa de doctorado en Historia con especialidad en América Latina de la Universidad de Maryland. Su investigación doctoral se centra en la dictadura de Augusto Pinochet, los orígenes del desarrollo social neoliberal en Chile y su traumático impacto sobre los sectores más desposeídos del país. Diego, born in Santiago, Chile in 1986, obtained his BA and MA in history from the Pontificia Universidad Católica in Chile between 2005 and 15. In the spring of 2017, he incorporated himself to the program, the PhD program in history with a specialty in Latin America. His doctoral research is focused on the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet, the origins of the social neoliberal development in Chile and its traumatic impact on the most marginalized sectors of the country. And after all of that, I will go ahead and gladly pass the mic over to Wanda so she can get us started on the presentations today. Thank you very much, Wanda.
Thank you for the introductions and Lasc for organizing and having me. I greatly appreciate it. I'll go ahead and get started. So my father meticulously kept records wherever he could, in dressers and desks, under beds, and so on. Among his things were not only precious photographs and VHS tapes, but also his counterfeit social security card, a copy of his deportation record, tax records, and a number of other government adjacent documents. The urgency that underlined my father's archival practice was his racialized illegality. I use racialized illegality to describe how Central Americans of color are visually signified with illegality. Black, Indigenous, Mestizx, or Ladinx Central Americans exceed the visual paradigms of legal American citizenship and are therefore viewed as illegal in one way or another. However, in accordance with Juan Herrera's theorization, racialized illegality also denotes how illegality is experienced differently based on the convergence of racial hierarchies in Latin America and the United States, which both position Blackness and indigeneity at the bottom. As a formerly undocumented Ladino from Guatemala, my father kept records because he needed them to navigate his racialized illegality in the day-to-day, obtain employment, access personal transportation, housing, and to connect with family and friends. For undocumented migrants and their families, archives are therefore not only personal, but excruciatingly political. As actors within a wide range of archival repositories become increasingly interested in archiving, that is to say, collecting, assessing, and preserving undocumented Central American histories, we must consider how it is done and its sequential implications. This essay questions what factors we must consider when and how we go about archiving undocumented Central Americans. As such, I'm concerned with repositories at various scales, from those held within institutions to those in the comfort of people's personal homes. Through an analysis of various traditional and untraditional archives, I find that some archives have the tendency to incite, perpetuate epistemic, emotive, and material violence against Black, Indigenous, Ladinx, and Mestizx people that largely constitute undocumented Central Americans. I argue that in order to undo and combat the violence of the archive, we must privilege the multiple embodied experiences of undocumented Central Americans of color while engaging in archival processes. In doing such, we are centering the knowledges and needs of undocumented Central Americans, and making archives sites of empowerment. In order to make archives these sites of empowerment, I propose 5 suggestions to archival actors, which I will further explain in the presentation, but they are to consider the radical archival logics, identify community nuances, understand multiple use value, follow the undocumented Central Americans archival lead, and represent undocumented Central Americans wholly. So the first thing that I believe we must consider is what Kristen Weld refers to as the archival logic, which is the organizing principle or the reasoning why the records were accumulated. That is to say, what led to the formation of this collection? What purpose did the archive serve? While the archival logic of each collection varies, it can be placed within a liberatory or oppressive matrix. Many archives, however, uphold oppressive state power, and once the archive no longer serves the need of the oppressive state, the records begin their descension into destruction. This was the case in 2017, when the US National Archives announced their approval for ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to destroy documents regarding the sexual abuse of, and death of detained migrants. Given the data available online, we can't identify the nationality of the subjects of the archival records. However, the overall number of detained migrants originating from Central America allows us to infer that Central Americans are also affected by the atrocities detailed in the ICE documents scheduled for disposal. Archival record appraisals like this are commonplace. Nonetheless, in disposing these documents pertaining to migrant detainees' distress, the archival institution is facilitating the enactment of physical violence against people at the hands of state agencies. Furthermore, the archival institution enacts an epistemic violence because it prevents the wider public from learning about these atrocities and holding the state accountable. While the archival logic behind the archives discussed in this section serve the oppressive initiatives of the state, archival actors can unearth a more radical archival logic from the very same records to hold the state accountable for its actions. Next, archival actors must identify community nuances. There is an established interest in collecting and archiving artifacts and documents as they relate to the migrations of Latinxes, especially clandestine migration across the US-Mexico border. The collection of migration-related materials is one of the ways Central Americans are beginning to be archived institutionally. Though the racial and ethnic identities of undocumented migrants are not always clear in the documents and artifacts of said collections, as archival actors, we must remain cognizant of not homogenizing the undocumented migrant experience. The same standard remains when we're only talking about undocumented Central Americans as well. This is important because, as Juan Herrera's theory of racialized illegality makes clear, the experience of illegality is profoundly shaped by racial subjectivity. In our acquisition, appraisal, and description of migrant-related materials, archival actors must consider the similarities as well as the dissimilarities among undocumented migrants across racial and ethnic subjectivities. And I wanted to show you all this example, if I can pull it up, of a contemporary artist named Tom Kiefer. So this is Tom Kiefer's series, El Sueño Americano, The American Dream. And it is an example of how an archive on migrant illegality is ridded of multiple subjectivities, namely race. Kiefer's photographic archive has gained acclaim for evoking pro-immigrant sentiment through the depictions of banal objects, which circulate through galleries nationally and on Instagram internationally. However, Kiefer's aesthetic arrangement and descriptive language on Instagram do not communicate the nuances of migration to the US. On the contrary, the understanding of migration remains quite superficial. On November 14, 2018, for example, Kiefer shared this photograph and the various personal grooming tools, which are positioned horizontally and vertically to maximize the space available in the frame. The image caption states, when apprehended by US CBP, personal belongings carried by migrants crossing the desert that are considered non-essential or potentially lethal are confiscated, followed by a number of hashtags: El Sueño Americano Project, Refugees, Caravan, Claudia Gonzalez. The photograph that I display here focuses on quantity, communicating the sheer mass of unidentified homogeneous migrants being detained at the southern US border. Additionally, the grooming tools are also arranged in multiple directions, making it disturbingly reminiscent of how detained migrants position themselves when crammed into holding cells at detention facilities. These concerns, however, are countered by the bright color palette, which evoke a sort of commercial innocence alike that of pop art. Altogether, the quantity, positioning, and color palette present a dichotomy of pleasantries and grim realities. The grim reality of immigrant detention centers, however, is obfuscated in Kiefer's imagery. Visually, viewers are unable to grasp the full inhumanity of detention centers because of the pop art aesthetic, nor are viewers able to fully grasp migrants' complex humanity because it is reduced to a mass of grooming tools without significant contextualization. The accompanying caption does not express the significance of the imagery either. Sterile captions like this were repeatedly used throughout Kiefer's Instagram account, not bridging the gaps of knowledge that may exist among digital audiences. Importantly, I want to highlight the use of the Claudia Gonzalez hashtag in the depicted posts. Claudia Patricia Gomez Gonzalez was a 20-year-old Indigenous woman from the Maya Mam community in Guatemala, who US Customs and Border Protection killed on May 23, 2018, after she crossed into Texas. While Kiefer utilizes the Claudia Gonzalez hashtag to ambiguously refer to the murdered Maya woman, he does not explicate who she was in either the November 14th post, which I have here, or others in which he uses the hashtag. To elaborate on who Claudia Patricia Gomez Gonzalez was, would begin to highlight the multiple dimensions of Central Americanness and the particular obstacles of various racial and ethnic groups from Central America. Instead, Kiefer clumps all migrants, many of them Black and Indigenous, from the isthmus into an aesthetically pleasing pictorial frame, disregarding their differences. In this aesthetic and descriptive disregard, Kiefer upholds the notion of Central American mestizaje. Archival actors must refrain from upholding mestizaje through the homogenization of people and their experiences in the archive, and in turn identify the community's nuances. Another element archival actors need to keep in mind is how undocumented Central Americans fundamentally rely on the archive to navigate their day-to-day. An awareness of the fundamental necessity of the archive for undocumented Central Americans should guide archival actors. Because undocumented Central American archives have legal, effective, and even quotidian functions, acquisition initiatives may work contrary to the needs of said community. Jason de Leon argues that various forms of material culture are used, sometimes ineffectively, to achieve the goal of crossing the US-Mexico border undetected. Artifacts and mementos like call cards, photographs, notes, prayer cards, and rosaries may be used to physically, psychologically, and emotionally accomplish their migratory journey. Then, upon arriving to the US, undocumented Central Americans also need to accumulate an archive of a different kind to do ordinary activities like obtain employment and a driver's license, and even to legalize their status. Consider, for example, a legal case in which a migrant is adjusting their status through marriage with a US citizen. The undocumented migrant and their spouse have to prove the validity of their relationship through photographs and affidavits, among a number of other records like pay stubs, taxes, and the likes. Therefore, archival actors should be mindful of both the cultural, historical value of mundane records and artifacts, as well as the pragmatic and affective value undocumented Central American archives hold before attempting to take custody of any sort of records. And archival actors know that archives are vital to the preservation of cultural memory. Yet, there are some records that should not be preserved. Undocumented Central Americans carry with them the traumas from their countries of origin, their migration journeys, and experiences in the United States. As a multiply marginalized group, social justice-oriented archival actors are eager to preserve the experiences of undocumented Central Americans. Archival actors like myself feel a sort of archival anxiety in knowing that the lives of ordinary undocumented Central Americans go unnoticed and will likely be forgotten in the near future. Yet there are instances in which undocumented Central Americans do not want to preserve the historical record because of the trauma it reignites. Archival actors must learn how to navigate our own archival anxiety, the need to preserve the archives, and the trauma of a community we care about. This requires establishing archival models in which undocumented Central Americans are not only centered, but also hold archival power, and where archival actors know when to step back. In other words, archiving undocumented Central Americans always requires a participatory archival model. I was confronted with my own archival anxiety in attempting to assemble my father's personal history. In the years leading up to his death, I introduced him to the possibility of recording his oral history to keep in my digital archives. Casually, I would ask, ¿Por qué decidiste emigrar a los Estados? Why did you decide to migrate to the US? And he would irritably reply, Porque quería una vida mejor, because I wanted a better future. A very basic answer. His brief, irritable response shut down the possibilities of a recorded interview. Meanwhile, I was left with a ton of burning questions. After his death, however, I learned he was a conscription target for the Guatemalan military during its violent civil war. While I questioned why my father never told me about his childhood or any political occurrences in Guate, it dawned on me that he may not have wanted me to know. He may not have wanted to remember the fragments of his past, and rightfully so, because as archivist Ira Tanzi asserts, no one owes their trauma to archivists. In turn, archival actors must ask, what do undocumented Central Americans want to remember about themselves? Among the things that my mother kept after my father died was a number of photographs that visually narrate their lives as both undocumented and documented Central Americans in the DC metropolitan area. They depict dates at restaurants, trips to nearby amusement parks, apartment parties, cookouts, and more. The personal archives of undocumented Central Americans contain a plethora of records that speak to their complex personhood. All too often, however, archival actors focus on Central Americans' hardships as undocumented and racial minorities, and do not focus enough on the vibrant social lives and communities they build and maintain, both in the US and in their countries of origin. Quotidian visual records like this one seem to be of little historical or cultural value. Yet upon deeper analysis, the significance of quotidian visual records is made clear when superimposed with the affective and social forces at play beyond the scope of the frame. This photograph features my father standing in front of a sound system, wall posters, and framed photographs in an apartment in Arlington, Virginia. My father's hometown friend lived in this apartment, likely with other undocumented men from the same town. I'm captivated by my dad's large brain in the picture that stretches so wide that it hides his dark brown eyes, communicating excitement. He wears business casual attire and crosses his arms in front of his chest while he stands hip width apart, almost as if to say, look at me, I'm here, I'm living good. My father's attire and strong stance in front of the American commercial goods suggests that he and his peers not only successfully migrated to the US, but were also starting to obtain financial gains in a way that was not possible for them in Guatemala. While he and his peers were construction workers and their incomes were minimal, their financial gains were plentiful in comparison to their income as agricultural laborers in rural Guate. I find it interesting the way nothing in the image alludes to the arduous labor they exerted on day to day, as if to say, there's more to me than being an undocumented construction worker. Moreover, the accumulation of commercial goods shown in the photograph probes at what capitalist America promises, albeit falsely for most. Photographs like this articulate desire and vernacular performances that expand beyond their illegality. The vernacular performances documented in visual records can be easily disregarded as insignificant if not analyzed carefully and critically. That is to say, if archival actors do not regard undocumented Central Americans' entire humanity, quotidian visual records like this will be lost to time. So in conclusion, when archiving undocumented Central Americans, archival actors must consider the radical archival logics, identify community nuances, understand multiple use value, follow their archival lead, and represent undocumented Central Americans wholly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And next up, we have Julia Paris, whose presentation, Fight Back in Oral History Analysis of Resistance and Gender Violence Victimization. All right, thank you. And I want to pass the mic to Julia right now.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Wanda. That was a beautiful presentation. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my presentation. My name is Julia, and it's nice to meet you all. I want to start with a trigger warning for content on sexual and domestic violence before I start telling you about my paper. So I'll give a moment while I pull up my presentation. This paper is an exploration of gender violence. It is an oral history narrative of victims who fought back. Inspired by my own experience with sexual violence and as a witness to domestic violence, I wanted to tell stories of survivors, witnesses, and victims from women in my own family. Following Saadia Hartman's methodology in Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiment, the focus of this research is an experiential narrative of regaining erotic and physical agency after surviving domestic violence. Sorry, 1 second, I'm still trying to pull up my presentation.
Julia, I can share my screen if you need me to. Do you want me to do that? I think I have your slides.
Yeah, please, if you can. Oh, I think I got it. Can everyone see my screen now?
Yes, I can see it.
Yes.
Okay, great. Oh, sorry.
I think it would be the present button right next to share, no, for the presentation.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to pull it up, but my computer's being a little slow.
No, I understand.
There we
Technology
go.
happens all the time to me. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so Jackie Alexander calls for Caribbean women's erotic autonomy to become a benchmark of our citizenship, to dismantle colonial connections between property ownership, respectability, and citizenship. So when we talk about gender violence in the Caribbean, we also need to consider what that means for Black women that have a history of sexual violence starting from enslavement and colonialism. But many Caribbean historians are starting to realize that there were many ways that those victims fought back, and they are understanding what agency and sexual agency mean within the state through a modern lens. So trying to humanize the victims in a way by seeing the little ways that they did try to fight back. So some enslaved women would, for example, force an abortion so that and historians are now seeing that as agency. So this paper is mainly like a methodology, and I'm hoping that it will inspire other people to seek out alternative knowledge producers. So in line with traditions of critical race theory and oral histories, I begin this research with a personal experience inspired from a place of frustration. Many critical race scholars are continuously challenged because of academic gatekeeping when taking on issues like racism, sexism, classism, and other forms of discrimination in our communities. Diane Millen reviewed the role of felt knowledge production within academia, specifically arguing that oral history's most significant potential lies in its ability to counter and intervene in a constantly morphing colonial system and capture the rich testimonies of those effectively excluded from academic discourses. Oral histories used here contributes to the growing scholarship on critical race theory methodologies, which seeks to disrupt white supremacy of knowledge producers by moving towards research guided by racial and social justice. So I use a critical race theory framework and the methods of oral history positioned within a Caribbean feminist epistemology to explore and understand the experiences of working class Afro-Guyanese women, resistance and agency in victimhood, and to address epistemological discourse on domestic and sexual harms, which rarely accounts for the political and historical sexual vulnerability of Black women and girls. The goal of this research is to understand and experience the world through the narratives from their eyes and learn what they know to be true. In doing so, this counters traditional research paradigms and leads to a heightened understanding of the experiences of Black women beyond educational institutions. The methods were therefore selected to enable in-depth exploration and interrogation of resistance to gender violence as it relates to victim agency. Crucially, this allows for the deconstruction of the nexus between reproduction versus personhood within the discourse of sexuality, pleasure, and classism. So key informant interviews were conducted. I utilize a qualitative, in-depth interview methodology. So each woman share how gender violence, class, and sexual agency has materialized in their lives. For the data of the study includes 8 oral interviews with women in my family who've experienced domestic or sexual violence. In particular, it tells of women who tirelessly imagine other ways to live, to be loved, and to have sex. The interviews were semi-structured and an interview guide was prepared, but ultimately it remained flexible to allow the participants to narrate their lives. So drawing from Hartman's work, this research considers epistemological and methodological perspectives existing outside of the academy to challenge hegemonic pedagogies which devalue, overlook, and marginalize or entirely exclude ordinary Black women's experiential lives. Throughout this research, I was conscious of how the research process on sensitive topics of rape and domestic violence could be affected by external factors such as mood, location, and family members. So the interviews took place via video chat in two-part sessions. So although I would have liked to conduct the interviews in person, COVID-19 happened, so I had to do it online, which I thought in the end was actually quite helpful. Some women were comfortable being interviewed in one session, but for all of the women, this was dependent on whether they were able to give their narratives uninterrupted by like family members, chit chat, or responsibilities that they have as parents. So for me, this methodology is personal because in understanding the need to be acutely conscious of what I write and which knowledge systems I cite to infiltrate the harmful reproductions of narrow mainstream. So a decolonizing framework approaches knowledge production in the academy from the perspective of coexistence rather than in opposition to Eurocentric ideologies. So therefore, it is critical that this research actively includes historically repressed people's narratives in academic discourse, mainly when consulting topics outside of the Western geographies. So for me, some of my first lessons on sexual agency, speaking up for myself, and not letting a man hit me were taught to me by my poor Black aunties, women, cousins, and sisters. These lessons are one of the examples of how narratives of such women need to be centered and elevated, especially in academia. Because in doing so, it breaks Eurocentric role. Sarah Ahmed created a new practice of citing works only written by women, which shattered the mold where ideologies of canonized male Eurocentric work are the standard of knowledge producers and reproducers. So in employing a similar methodology, this work refers only transnational and critical race theory or decolonial women writers and thinkers, many of whom are from the Caribbean. So there's only women and they are specifically chosen. This renders a limitation in the sources that were available to me, but it meant something for me to expose their work because it's usually erased in academia. So with this minor like setback, I still had the narrative that I was using as knowledge producers to back me up. So a lot of research usually doesn't talk about emotions and like what that means. So for me, it was clear to be kind and gentle with the participants to make sure that they felt comfortable. So, and also in terms of decolonizing, there is women in the Caribbean who are doing it on their own terms and defining what that means for them. So there is this popular soca song called Faluma. I can play like a quick second of it, but essentially the song is about loving women. And because like enslaved women were forced to reproduce and heterosexuality was sort of forced on us, and what was erased was a lot of sexualities that we held and values and gender identities were gone. So this song is about loving women and reclaiming that. Although there are anti-sodomy, anti-lesbian, colonial statues in the Caribbean, there are still ways that people are trying to, women especially, are trying to define what that means for them. So I'll play a bit of the song. Oh, I also forgot to add that it's in Surinamese language, an Afro-Indigenous Surinamese language. So the part that she sings about loving women isn't in English.
Is it supposed to, are we supposed to hear sound right now, Julia?
Oh, you're not hearing it?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry. It's okay. It's
Yeah, I think you have to, when you share screen, click on the sound. But if you don't feel comfortable, we can always do it after the presentation.
yeah, we can definitely we can do it after. So the interviews that I conducted provided holistic conversations on gender violence. It mainly examined secrecy and cyclical trauma in Black women's sexual exploitation as victims of rape and domestic violence. It focuses on how and why the many systems affecting post-emancipation societies should discuss not only white supremacy, but also patriarchal violence. The interviewees are cited as knowledge producers to support the analysis of decolonizing academic gatekeeping of knowledge producers. So who are knowledge producers? Often knowledge producers are white men or people who are academically acclaimed, so they have some degree. And what I did was I wanted to share that for women, their lives are usually quite personal. So that their resistance usually exists on a personal level, but I want to include that on a transnational level of the greater movement against colonialism. So what I did was center myself in this research, because what helped was that because I was a victim of sexual violence myself, I was able to connect with my interviewees, and it helped made it a bit more comfortable also because we were family. So he knocked me and I knocked him back. That's when I knew that I had to leave him, because either he would have killed me or I would have had to kill him. Since around the age of 5 or 6-year-old, my Aunt Marilyn witnessed domestic violence, sometimes as often as 3 or 4 times a week. As her father, my maternal grandfather, would beat her mother. It was really bad, so bad, my aunt would say. Many gender theorists document that domestic violence is not just physical, but also includes emotional and verbal violence. The abuse Marilyn witnessed at home made her frequently wonder why her mother was putting on with my grandfather. After reflecting on her compounding issues of low self-esteem and persistently being told that no other man would want to take her, or that she should have been lucky that he took her, Marilyn concluded that she understood why her mother stayed. Despite witnessing constant emotional and physical abuse, Marilyn talks about the many instances that there were resistance. So she talks about there was a moment when all of her siblings decided to attack her father, and they all, because they were just tired of him beating on her mom, so they literally just started beating him. And like, to be clear, I'm not trying to glorify violence, but what I'm trying to show is the complexity of agency and victimhood. Marilyn's experience highlights an aspect of gender violence in Caribbean feminist discourse that is sort of under-researched. So, as Clark Hines says, the institutionalized rape of Black women has never been seen as powerful a symbol of Black oppression as the spectacle of lynching. Rape has always involved patriarchal notions of women being at best not entirely unwilling accomplices. It is not outwardly inviting a sexual attack. The links between Black women and illicit sexuality, consolidated during the antebellum years, had a powerful ideological consequences for the next 150 years. Except we rarely see that in academic discourse about rape being a form of something that we should decolonize, especially the constant patriarchal violence in Guyana. So in Guyana, 1 in 3 women experience partner violence, which is significantly higher than the global average. During my research, I also interviewed women who talked about rape, about their experiences with rape, and there were scenes where their family members either sort of forced them to keep it a secret, but I think towards the end of the interviews, some of the women talked about how it was freeing to sort of have a space to talk about being raped and not keep a family secret, or not trying to protect it, or women who left their situation. So while they're still under these circumstances of societal constructs, there were ways that they found to love themselves, practice self-care, ways that they enjoy sex, enjoy their lives, start embracing, celebrating their bodies, wearing short clothing, shaking their ass, like reclaiming what was taken from us and seen as deviant and put down. These women have embraced that.
Hi, Julia. The presentation is very empowering. And as much as I would love to hear you talk, I was hoping we could kind of wrap it up in a minute, because
Oh yeah, I'm done. It's 15
minutes
I
over.
had 15
Thank
minutes.
you.
Yeah, I'm finished.
You can wrap up if you want. Oh, I didn't mean to cut you. I mean, you can take a couple of seconds too if you need to.
Yeah, I was done.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So thank you all for coming to my presentation. In the end, I had a great interview and learned about ways that we could decolonize academia through different types of knowledge producers.
I love that. And I really appreciate that. As a student in gender studies, I can't wait for the Q&A to ask you more questions about your methodology. And thank you so much for the presentation. It really was very empowering. And I look forward to learning more about these ways. And hopefully we can play the song after the next presentation, because I would love to listen to that. Y bueno, ahora me gustaría pasarle el batón al compañero Diego y la próxima persona que estará presentando. Diego, a ver si te podemos escuchar solo para ver cómo anda tu audio.
Hola. Hola a todos, ¿me escuchan bien?
Sí, te escucho.
Perfecto, perfecto. Muchas gracias, María Cecilia.
Gracias.
Bueno,
Hi,
reciban todo
everyone.
un cordial saludo
So,
a
a warm
los que están
greeting
conectados a
to
este
you all
panel.
who have connected to
También
this
muchas
panel.
gracias a Wanda y Julia, he
And
disfrutado mucho sus presentaciones.
hello, Wanda and Emilia, I've
Y por
enjoyed your
cierto, vaya mi
presentations.
gratitud para el comité
And
organizador de esta conferencia
of
anual
course,
de Lasc.
to the organizers or
Hemos sido
conference.
convocados para hablar de la ruptura
We
en tiempos
are
de
here
pandemia
together to talk
y
about
yo
these
he agregado en
disruptions
el título de esta
during the pandemic.
ponencia de
And
neoliberalismo. Lo que
so
me
I am
pareció
going to
más
talk about
interesante de la propuesta
neoliberalism.
cuando asumí el
And
placer de
what I
estar aquí con
thought
ustedes
about
es que se nos pide reflexionar sobre
that I'm going to have. Our interpreters not receiving audio.
con un granito de arena a esta tarea de pensar sobre cómo ser disruptivo en un entorno global que por la pandemia y otras diversas razones se ha vuelto desolador. Para quienes no me conocen y no tuvieron oportunidad de escuchar la biografía, yo soy historiador, soy chileno y curso el doctorado en historia en la Universidad de Maryland desde el 2017. En mi investigación, que por efecto de la pandemia ha sufrido algunas modificaciones, algunas variaciones, y yo estudio la evolución del concepto de pobreza en Chile y las gestiones estatales asociadas a ella, he ido incursionando en la práctica de la historia oral, por cierto, en una modesta intención, y es de esta experiencia de la que quisiera hablar y
And so
compartir
I
con
want to talk to
ustedes
you a little bit
hoy
about
día.
this and share with you
Mi
today.
premisa, para decirlo
The
claramente,
premise
es que la
to make
historia
things
oral
clear
puede
is
ser
that
un
oral
elemento
history
disruptivo,
can
por la
be
sencilla razón
disruptive.
de que está basada en actitudes y conductas en las que desafortunadamente, a mi juicio, ya no se pone tanto énfasis y que en realidad se han ido convirtiendo en la excepción. el escucharnos los unos a los otros, el hacer esfuerzos genuinos por comprendernos y sobre todo el mantenernos abiertos a la idea que siempre estamos aprendiendo algo. Al menos esas son las lecciones con las que yo me quedé tras mi experiencia como historiador oral. Obviamente, esta noción de la conversación como un aspecto metodológico y fundamental de la producción historiográfica no es en absoluto mía, y yo tan solo quiero hoy día compartir mi mirada sobre lo que he aprendido ejerciendo este trabajo de historia oral. Entonces, lo primero es, me permito preguntarle a la audiencia si acaso no es profundamente disruptiva la siguiente idea desarrollada por el historiador oral Alessandro Portelli, de que la historia pública no tiene contenido sin referencia a las historias individuales que la componen, que la urden. Este mismo historiador italiano...
Diego, creo que perdimos el audio un poco. No sé si me logras escuchar. Disculpa, estabas por leer la cita, creo.
Único que es propio.
Ahora sí, ahora de vuelta. ¿Me escuchás? Disculpa, Diego, te perdimos cuando estabas por leer la cita. El audio perdimos. Si podrías reiterar esa parte.
Ok, ni un problema, me disculpo por los problemas de audio. ¿Me pueden escuchar?
Sí, ahora perfecto. Gracias.
Decía entonces que la traducción es mía y la cita dice así: Portelli nos llama a reconocer el dramático e indisoluble vínculo entre la historia y las experiencias personales, entre lo único que es propio, las esporas de tristeza en hogares, cocinas y memorias angustiadas, y la percepción y reconstrucción del historiador sobre los eventos históricos, públicos y generales. La tarea y el tema de la historia oral es explorar esta distancia y este vínculo sin violar ese espacio, sin agrietar lo único de cada espora, para conectarlos con la historia y de esa manera forzar a la historia a escuchar esas experiencias personales. En mi trabajo como historiador oral he tratado de hacer ese esfuerzo de conexión entre lo general y lo particular, entre, por así decirlo, la plaza pública y el espacio íntimo de la cocina. En definitiva, de entender la conversación o el diálogo como una pieza de arte y atreverse a pensar en que vale la pena aproximarse a los detalles de la vida cotidiana para comprender la historia con mayúscula, aquella historia que vivimos estructuralmente. En el contexto de la conversación así, es que propongo que esa historia con mayúscula, tan lejana, tan oficial, se puede y debería convertir siempre en una historia vivida en carne propia por alguien con la que se puede establecer intimidades, empatías, respetos. Y creo que en eso hay una cierta solemnidad, pues el entrevistado, esta es mi experiencia, en cierto sentido le abre la puerta de algo íntimo, que de otra manera quedaría oscurecido al entrevistador. En este caso al historiador que propone la conversación. Es lo que me tocó comprender indistintamente cuando hablé con Marisol, Claudia, Marta, Gabriel, Doña Maggi o Don Nelson. Estas entrevistas que conduje son diversas. Las más tempranas se produjeron en septiembre de 2019 y otras tantas en junio de 2020. Las del primer grupo se produjeron en persona, las restantes a través de Zoom. Algunos de mis entrevistados viven en la capital Santiago, mientras que otros en las ciudades del norte y sur de Chile. Entre ellos hay mujeres y hombres anónimos de quienes estoy inmensamente agradecido por haberme permitido asomarme a su intimidad. Y como doña Elsa y don Nelson, invitarme una mañana de sábado, por ejemplo, a compartir un rico desayuno mientras hablábamos, o como Marisol, quien se hizo un espacio en su rutina laboral para recibirme en la misma sala de colaciones de la municipalidad donde ella trabaja. Con ella conversamos formalmente por más de una hora, aunque en realidad lo hicimos mucho más tiempo. En efecto, Marisol tuvo la amabilidad de darme un tour por la comuna en la que reside y trabaja, La Granja, una municipalidad al sur de Santiago de muy bajos recursos económicos. Una anécdota, repasando mi diario de vida, veo que el día que hicimos este recorrido, junto a una entrada en la que anoto: este es el día en que Greta Thunberg ha conmovido al mundo con su mensaje ante las Naciones Unidas, la admiro profundamente. También escribí sobre este tour que Marisol me dio y anoté: Hoy, recorrido imprevisto por la granja gracias a Marisol. En ese Santiago hay toneladas de pobreza, o lo que es lo mismo, de olvido. Creo que Marisol estaba tratando de educarme, por cierto, con toda razón, en la dura realidad que ella y tantos otros de mis compatriotas viven a diario, en partes de la ciudad donde los frutos del crecimiento y la igualdad no han sabido llegar. Yo no podía imaginarme que a las pocas semanas de esta visita ocurriría en Chile lo que se ha dado en llamar estallido social, y que tiene a mi país actualmente inserto en un proceso constituyente. Pienso también que el ejercicio de la historia oral, o si se quiere, de una filosofía de la conversación, puede contribuir a reducir la brecha
that,
entre los
we
discursos
have to
triunfalistas
close
sobre
this
el Chile
gap
neoliberal de las
between
últimas
the
décadas
neoliberal
y el
Chile in
conjunto
the
de las
last few
experiencias
decades
materiales de las
that
personas que
go
habitan dentro de
contrast the
ese marco
experiences of
de
the people who
relaciones.
live within that framework between. The interpreter has lost audio.
Diego,
Estoy entrando.
Diego,
¿Sí?
disculpa, te perdimos de vuelta. La última parte que escuchamos fue el marco de relaciones.
Correcto, me disculpo nuevamente. Lo que decía es que pienso que la historia oral puede contribuir a reducir la brecha entre los discursos triunfalistas sobre el Chile neoliberal de las últimas décadas y el conjunto de experiencias materiales de las personas que habitan dentro del marco de relaciones del Estado y la sociedad en Chile en los últimos 30 años. Y también continuaba diciendo que conversar con el matrimonio de Marta y Gabriel, por ejemplo, ambos artesanos tradicionales en piedra con barbalita en la ciudad de Valle, fue también una experiencia de aprendizaje en sí misma. Sí, creo que me conviene apagar la cámara. Marta y Gabriel, los dos entrando hoy día a sus 60, protagonizan su propia historia de redención y resiliencia, y no puedo sino observar el mayor respeto por las experiencias que compartieron conmigo.
And
Llegaron a
I
Valle a
have the
principios
utmost
de
respect for their
1980, donde se
experience. They
conocieron
came to
al ser reubicados en esas ciudades de Santiago por la dictadura de Pinochet con el objeto de que trabajaran en el PEM, o Programa de Empleo Mínimo, y POG, Programa de Ocupación para Jefes de Hogar, dos programas municipales de empleo de emergencia que entregaban un ingreso por debajo de la línea de la pobreza a aquellos definidos como parte de la extrema pobreza que la dictadura militar estableció para aliviar las cifras de desempleo en medio de las crisis económicas que el país experimentó en los 70 y 80. Con su simpatía natural, Gabriel no pudo describir de mejor manera el significado de esos programas de empleo. En algún momento de nuestra conversación me dijo, el PEM era para pagar la luz y el agua nomás. Marta incluso fue tan cariñosa de compartir conmigo una obra corta de su autoría que contiene sus memorias y su historia de vida personal titulada Las cosas viejas pasaron. La verdad es que yo disfruté mucho mi tiempo conversando con ellos, y como mostraré en breve en los fragmentos que voy a presentar de estas conversaciones, la conversación se movió por diversas emociones. Quisiera dar una idea lo más clara posible de esta experiencia de aprendizaje por la que todo historiador pasa, por lo que he seleccionado, como decía, dos extractos de mis conversaciones con mis entrevistados. El primero es un momento de mi conversación con Gabriel y Marta en el que Gabriel nos explica cómo fue que consiguió un trabajo sobre el que no sabía mucho en el momento. Tuvo que recurrir, así lo pongo yo, a las artes de la ficción. Y su explicación, como se podrá oír, nos llevó a los tres a las risas y en buena medida contribuyó a que pudiera yo acercarme humanamente a ambos en el espacio de la entrevista. Y el segundo extracto, un poquito más largo, corresponde a las memorias de doña Elsa, una mujer santiaguina de toda la vida, a quien yo visité en la localidad de Chihuayante, en el sur de Chile, sobre su experiencia en el crucial día del 11 de septiembre de 1973 en Santiago, tratando ese día de ir al pediatra con su esposo e hija de meses. Así que si tengo tiempo, quisiera compartir estos audios con ustedes. En total son alrededor de 5 minutos, pero si hay alguna restricción en el tiempo, por favor, háganlo saber.
Sí, yo creo que podríamos hacerlo como en unos 2 minutos y medio. No sé si sería posible, Diego.
Sí, por cierto, voy a compartir
Te perdimos de vuelta. Bueno.
cayeron. Trajeron una constructora.
¿Podrías, disculpa Diego, recién ahora volvió el audio, ¿podrías empezar de vuelta el clip?
Sí, por supuesto. Aquí
Bueno.
va. Mis disculpas, mis disculpas.
En el 85.
El 85.
Porque ya en el 85 trabajaba esporádicamente en lo que cayeron. Trajeron una constructora. De todo un poco. Soldadura, carpintería, jardinería.
Ya, ahora sí.
Es multifacético este guapo. Yo aprendí un parrón.
Ya.
Ahí ganaba plata, ya. Ganaba 7.500 pesos.
Ya.
A 3.000,
Dobló.
Ganaba 7.500
Dobló.
pesos. Y ahí trabajé más o menos como 8 meses. Luego se dio cupo en televisión agrícola y postulé y quedé.
Ya.
Ahí ganaba 12.000. Ahí me pagaban 12.000.
Varios años.
No,
Ahí trabajé 2 años en la televisión agrícola y luego llegó un francés.
Ya.
Andaba buscando gente, se paró así, andaba buscando a un señor para ir a una minera. Y andaban varias personas en una camioneta 3/4. Y buscaron al señor, le dije dónde vivía, del río, que se llama así, del río. Y ya. Y me pregunta él, me dijo, ¿queréis trabajar en la minera? Bueno, ya, ¿de cuánto estamos hablando? No, dijo, si pagan 25. Ah, y a lo que ganaba, a 12, 25, me fui al tiro.
Sí, pues.
Y al tiro. Y llegué a trabajar en una minera y no conocía el cobre, no sabía cómo salía el cobre. Entonces, yo una de las cosas que aprendí en la vida, que hay que estar con la oreja parada.
Sí.
La oreja parada y acercarse a la gente que sabe, a los adultos mayores, ya ellos sabían cómo era, y me acerqué a ellos y le dije, guapo, le pregunté a ellos cómo era el cobre, cómo estaba. Me dijo, esto es el cobre. Me mostraron nada, le dije, no, yo me imaginaba que el cobre salía en barras, una cosa así, pues. No tenía la menor idea. Así que me fui a trabajar. Cuando llegó el dueño de la empresa, el francés, me preguntó cómo estaba el cobre, y yo veía para oreja como los caballeros están hablando. Y me dijo, no, me está dando un 3%, un 3,5%. Entonces me pregunto, ¿cómo está el metal? ¿Cómo lo veis? Más o menos elegí yo como un 3%, 3,5%. Ah, no, está bien, tú sabes ya, tú te quedas. Que te trabajando.
Bueno, ese fue el fragmento que quería compartir con ustedes. Entiendo que ya mi tiempo se está acabando. Les doy les agradezco mucho que hayan prestado atención y quisiera terminar solo también agradeciendo a la doctora Karen Rosenblatt y a mis colegas Eben Levey y Sabrina González, porque ellos han sido una parte bien importante en mi trabajo para pensar sobre la historia oral.
In my
Así
work
que con esto
as I
termino
think about
y
oral
muchísimas
history.
gracias por
And
prestar
thus
atención.
concluding, I want to thank you once more for your time.
Thank you very much, Diego, for your presentation. And hold on. And I just wanted to say that both Maria and I and everybody here had a great time listening to all 3 discussions today. All presentations are about coming up with new ways of knowing and communicating. Wanda to know Central American histories, Julia to know yourself, your sexuality, your positionality, and Diego to know through the everyday performances that transfer meaning in oral exchanges. And then there's also like ways in which that we think about our relationship to the archives, right? So like in what ways can one disrupt the archives and disrupt knowledge production? But now I want to open up the floor to question and answer. I mean, for questions from the audience. So
Sorry, Jonathan.
so you can use the question and answer feature right here down below next, or you can raise your hand, and both Maria and I will moderate the Q&A.
And I think that we should, you know, as Di Cabrera mentions, give Julia a chance to finish,
Oh, yes.
wrap up. And, you know, if you want to go ahead and show the song, because I would be interested in hearing it.
Yes, of course. I didn't have too much more to add, but I thought yeah, so thanks for that. But I do want to play the song. Do you want to play it? Because I don't think it's going to play on I can try playing it on my screen again.
If you prefer, do you want to send us a link?
Yeah, okay, I'll do that. I'll post it in the chat right now.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen.
Okay.
This beachfront verba about to become part of an unforgettable.
Y'all here?
Get ready to wine. Get ready to wine. Follow my ding ding ding. Namya lama de. Boko e jana. Kapasi e jana. Dago e jana. Ding ding ding.
I think the sound is like merging.
Boko e jana. Kapasi e jana. Dago e jana.
I'm sorry, Julia.
It's okay. People can play it on their own, personally, if you can.
Okay, I'll go ahead and share the link also, while we give you the space to you know, talk and kind of finish up. And you know, I'm sorry.
Oh, here is for the person who no puedes respirar. Here's the link. So Julia, did you want to say anything else regarding the video?
Oh,
Oh, you're mute.
I think I'm having a bit of a sound issue. Just give me one moment, please.
Mhm.
Ah, there we go. Okay. Yeah, so basically the song, most people don't know that it is a song about celebrating women and like loving women. So essentially, I was just saying that there are different ways that we can view decolonization through not different alternative knowledge producers and experiential narratives through oral histories. That's it. Thank you all for presenting and thanks for hosting the panel.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a question from Sabrina Gonzalez. How's this?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you everyone for this wonderful panel. I have questions for all the presenters. You don't have to respond all, maybe you can keep thinking about this as the panel finishes. Julia, I would like to hear more about your interviewees' reactions to this idea of considering themselves as producer of knowledge. So is this something that that you discuss with them, and how do they see themselves as producer of knowledge, and to what extent do they see themselves as also challenging those narratives that you're proposing? And then I really, for Wanda, I also have this question about, I would like, so Wanda, I love your presentation. I'm a historian, so all the time I wanted to hear more, like see more the documents that you had in your dad's archive. And then I kind of step back and start thinking, wait, maybe there is a reason why there are some like ethics around what you share, how you share it, no? Especially thinking about immigrant stories in the US. So I would like you to expand more on the idea of wholly representing these stories. I think it was the last point that you raised on the like 5 points that you were proposing for participatory archives. I would like to hear more about how are you thinking about that concept, especially kind of reflecting upon the inherited nature of like the silences in the archives. What that specifically the holy part is what I am curious about to hear. And then Diego, I think your presentation was really powerful. For me, one very powerful moment was when you shared the journal entry, when you said that neighborhood, it was a ton of poverty, or in other words, which meant that it was a ton of olvido. I don't know what's the word in English. So I guess I think I don't know if this is something that you are playing or that you are drawing on other historians. I'm not as aware as you are, of course, on oral history, but I think there is a very powerful connection that you made there between poverty and olvido, no? And what is olvido? I don't remember the word in English, sorry. And then kind of thinking about the oral history as a methodology to recover, right, for memory, and how oral history can be then a very powerful tool against neoliberalism, and therefore like against poverty and like pro memory. You know, I don't know. It's just I don't think it's a question. It's just a comment that I had regarding what I think was the most interesting aspect of your presentation, and hopefully it's an idea that you keep working as you continue doing the interviews. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina. Maybe I can start first. So just to repeat your question or something similar to it, you asked how did the interviewees view themselves as knowledge producers? And how did they approach the idea of being a part of my paper as knowledge producers? Was that
Right.
kind of?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, so this has been a question for a while in my family. Like my mom was suffered, I talk about this in the paper, she experienced domestic violence, as did her mom, as did my father's mother. So it's always been something that's been much of an open secret. And I think like with my family, especially my sisters wanting to break generational curses around violence, we thought that I sort of approached them and was like, hey, how about we talk about this? I've met quite a lot of Caribbean people who've had similar stories of having, like knowing someone who's been raped or abused, and including incest. So we wanted to find a way to open that. But what was important for me was how I wanted to humanize the victims and have them sort of tell their stories within their own hands. How did they view themselves as knowledge producers? I had them bring photos, and that's included in the rest of the paper, and to help like jog their memory. And I thought that they were quite excited about it because they saw it as an opportunity to sort of heal, but also inspire other people to talk about their experiences. And hopefully we see it as a tool of decolonizing, particularly with Black women's history of sexual violence and abuse.
I think I could jump off of what you were saying as well, Julia. I saw, I guess, some similarities, even though our subject matters are slightly different. I think our methodologies are adjacent. Because similarly, I guess I should start saying that, like, I first encountered my dad's personal, like his records, like the actual papers and things after he passed away. It was just it was a very emotional thing for me. I just started grad school. I was mourning his death, and it was just kind of a way to grieve and try to like, well, who was this man beside, like, you know, this like stern, stoic Latino? But yeah, and so now as I'm venturing deeper into you know, writing about my methodologies, doing dissertation research, as I was writing this paper, I actually felt quite apprehensive about like what I shared and what I didn't share, and even like what I wanted to engage with. So there was like an emotional apprehension to it. So that's why I think I feel most comfortable right now with like social photographs, because I'm not just talking about his illegality and how the sort of questions that he had to have, but I guess I could give an example of what came to mind during, I was writing a paper and I was like, well, let me just pick up his things. And I picked up his wallet and started digging through it. And I found his permanent resident card because he became a permanent resident in 2006. And it was wrapped very cleanly in like its original paper, and then wrapped again in plastic, tucked away very gently. You know, most people don't travel with their resident cards. But I think I took that as a sort of performance, like, hey, I know the way you see me as illegal. And so just in case anyone were to stop me, I could sort of try to justify and prove that I should be here. So those are other examples that I have. I still haven't quite figured out how to include those in my research as far as like, you know, for the general public, but I'm trying to work. I'm so sorry. That was my niece and nephews in the background. But yeah, that's where I am with it all. I don't know if it requires like anonymity. I don't know. Or if it just requires me to kind of just work through it emotionally. And then to answer your question about representing Central Americans like wholly, I think that we focus a lot on Central American illegality, which is very important to their racial formation. And so I too focus on that. But I don't know, I get such joy from pictures like the one that I showed you all, or of like my parents and their other undocumented friends being like young in their 20s in the DMV. You know, in Northern Virginia, which is an area that is like really cast as white and yuppie. And I'm like, no, that's not everybody's experiences. So really using a lot of like Sadia Hartman's methods as well, and Tina Camp to to read beyond the actual image and imagine like, well, what sort of like revolution, not, I don't know if revolutionary is the right word, but what other ways of moving did they enact as undocumented peoples is I guess what I'm thinking about when thinking about Central Americans fully. Yeah, I hope that answered the question, Sabrina.
Yes, thank you so much.
Creo que me corresponde decir algunas palabras sobre los comentarios de Sabrina, que en realidad más que alguna pregunta, yo creo que muchas gracias, Sabrina. Creo que supiste leer muy bien lo que yo estaba tratando de expresar. La palabra que buscabas es abandono. Y yo pienso que sí, que si pudiera resumir en unas pocas ideas, lo que yo busco al practicar la historia oral es buscar los detalles, y en los detalles, en esas esporas de la vida cotidiana, uno puede encontrar la identidad, la riqueza de la identidad de cada persona, y tratar de combatir ese olvido y abandono que nos impone la estructura. Así que sí, yo en eso coincido en tu lectura de que la historia oral nos puede ayudar a combatir de manera efectiva el olvido y el abandono. Así que sí, muchas gracias, Sabrina.
Thank you very much. This panel was supposed to go to 12 o'clock, so we're 17 minutes over. So we will have to break for now, but again, I want to say thank you again to all the panelists. Thank you to my co-moderator. Thank you to those who are in charge of technical support. And just a reminder, at 1 o'clock, the State of the Center event will take place. So be sure to come then. So thank you all, and I hope you have a very lovely time during the conference today, and a very awesome day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks.
Thank you very much.